Hi, I'm Dr. Jen Peña, and I'm here to talk about all things sexual and reproductive health that have been dominating your group chat. This is Doom Scroll.
Jen, how hot is it where you are?
How hot is it where I am? Very hot. I live in the Caribbean, Tessa.
No, you live in a very warm environment. So, what are the implications of this heat, and in particular, some of the ways that our environment is changing on birth control?
We're talking about global warming and the effects that it's having on all things in the world, crops and weather patterns and all sorts of things. But we haven't really talked a lot about what it does to, medications and birth control. So, yeah, we have to be really careful, right? Because these pills have, ingredients like hormones that can get affected if you're keeping these pills in a really, really hot environment.
Are there any states that you should be especially cautious about this environmental impact on your medications?
If we're thinking about heat, and we're thinking about birth control options and how the heat can essentially potentially ruin the hormonal component of these birth control options, then we have to think, well, gosh, is that going to predispose to more pregnancies, right? Because people then are potentially not having options that are still working well, for contraception, or if they have to toss their contraception because it went bad because it was in the heat, then they have to go out and get more contraception. But what happens in states where they're not as readily available, right? So there's an access to care issue. And this happens with emergency contraception as well, because emergency contraception also has hormones. So what if all of a sudden your emergency contraception doesn't work? So you have to think about these things and what happens in states where abortion bans are very strict. And what happens if it's the same states that are really hot, like in Texas and Florida and Arkansas. So now you have like a perfect mix of a lot of stuff that can go wrong at the same time that can lead to unintended pregnancies.
Keeping that in mind, do you see that the medical community is going to respond to this?
Yeah, I think so, because what we're starting to see now is that these high temperatures aren't just sporadic things. These are like happening now summer after summer, and it's happening in more and more areas of the world. And so I feel that medical industry is going to have to figure out ways to come up with solutions that are more temperature resistant. They're going to have to think of shipping ways that are a little bit more sustainable.
You tell people to try to keep things at room temperature, but what happens when room temperature is very high? What across the board storage recommendations do you have?
I have to be aware that not everybody has air conditioners at home here where we live, or they might not have a refrigerator at home, or maybe one that they could use to store, their birth control. And so sometimes, obviously that's a first line. If they can do that and they have the resources, that's great. But sometimes they can't. And so what I've been telling my patients is always have, more than one of whatever you're using in case you have an inadvertent leaving your condoms out in the car or something like that, then you can have others that you can use, for birth control specifically. If there are, those circumstances where they can't protect them from the temperature, we try to talk about more permanent options like IUDs, where, they're not as susceptible to the temperature issue once they're implanted. And so that tends to be an option for a lot of people. Keeping condoms in the wallet is not a great idea really anywhere, because the other extreme, which is too cold, can also ruin them. So I would say keep them at home and keep them at room temperature. Only bring them out when you're going to use them.
Well, thanks for your advice, Jen. I really appreciate it.